You know what? I've never been wrapped up in titles. As head coach, assistant coach, like that never bothered me. I wanted to coach. This game has given us a tremendous lifestyle that we never could have dreamed of as kids. We still love it. Still have the passion for it.
Third puck! Gotta make those plays! 1-2-2, stay up!
Most games on the bench all time in NHL, and at 2,600, that's unbelievable. So.
Wow.
Well, it takes a lot to leave your wife. We're thrilled to have you back, so welcome back.
Don't even bring Judy on the bus with us to the airport.
Every day in this league is a blessing. It is. We're treated so well. We're in the best hockey league in the world. Never, ever, ever take a day for granted in this league. And I never have, and I never will. I just love the game. And yeah, it's been my life.
Welcome to the season wrap of Ground Control, the official podcast of the Winnipeg Jets. Jamie Thomas alongside the dynamic duo, as Kelly Moore calls them, on CJOB and Power 97 is Paul Edmonds and Mitchell Clinton, the broadcast team for the Winnipeg Jets, on your radio every single game of the regular season. So we were going to go over, originally the thought process behind this pod was to go back and look at the season that was for the Winnipeg Jets, but some news came down on Monday. Rick Bowness, the head coach of the Winnipeg Jets, has decided to retire. Paul, I'll start with you. Were you surprised of Rick's decision after the way he talked at the end of Game 5?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the initial address, he talked about the improvements they made, but yet the buck rested with him that they never kind of moved along in the series and didn't get it past Game 5 or even win it for that matter. And then you kind of felt like there was some unfinished business, right? And so that's kind of the way I felt, that he was going to weigh some things out personally and within the organization and then make a decision on coming back for another season. And then news came down that on Monday that there was a decision that was made and he was going to retire. So yeah, partially surprised by what ended up being him deciding not to continue as the head coach of the Winnipeg Jets. But we can discuss this. I mean, as we go further, he did a lot of great work in 2 short years here with the organization.
Yeah, so many franchise records this year, Mitch. It almost feels like there's another year there. There's almost like another reason to keep going. And just the thoughts of Rick's accomplishments with this hockey club over this past 2 years.
Yeah, and I think the one that stands out to me the most came from, this season, that run where they gave up 3 or less, and then within that, the run that they gave up 2 or less. Mm-hmm. Like, really, it's almost felt like since the Winnipeg Jets came to Winnipeg in 2011, the Achilles heel has been how they play defensively. They'd have these leads, they wouldn't be able to hold them, and then, you'd be thinking about the wins that got away as opposed to the ones that you were able to hang on to. And it just seemed throughout that 2-3 months-ish that if Winnipeg got ahead, it was almost over. Mm-hmm. Like, it was almost like those early 2000s where it was like, if you got up 1-0, well, it was over. And basically the way that Winnipeg was playing throughout that stretch, you could just tell there was complete and absolute buy-in from the players and the coaching staff. Their message was getting through. It was just this perfect relationship that was going. And, they rode obviously that run to an incredible record of 52 wins to tie that 2017-18 team, which I've been asked a few times about how to compare those two teams because they're just so different, right? Like that 17-18 team was high flying. They could beat you off the rush. The power play was tremendous. The penalty kill was really good. The defense was kind of shaped and constructed differently. Whereas this one, it's just they were so good in their own end. Yeah, they could capitalize in the offensive zone, but they even generated offense in a different way than that 17-18 team did. So I think over the course of these 2 years that Rick Bowness was the head coach, and he would, of course, give credit to his coaching staff and the players because the players are the ones that are out there executing, and the coaching staff has a big hand in this as well. But you could really see that, there were certain things that Rick Bowness, when he came to Winnipeg, wanted to address, and I think you can say after 2 years, he's definitely got that job done.
I think a lot of credit does have to be given to Rick for the big turn to change in 2 years. That's almost a lot of work done in such a short amount of time.
Well, leading up to Monday's presser where he had retired and resigned officially, there was 3 areas that he talked about going into his tenure, his second tenure as the head coach of the Winnipeg Jets. And there was 3 things that he wanted to accomplish. Number 1, get the team back to the playoffs. Well, he did that twice. Number 2, be a better defensive team. And incrementally through his first year, they were better defensively. And then they won the Jennings Trophy as the best defensive team in the league. And then I think the primary focus was to change the culture of the team. And undoubtedly, he's done that. And so now you talk about the legacy that he's going to leave. Well, it's a much better dressing room, a much better team, a much better cohesive unit than when he arrived here. They had to maneuver some pieces out and some pieces in to do that. But he was the architect of all of that. He understood what it took coming from places like Tampa and Dallas and Vancouver to understand what really it took to have a better room. And when that translates in the room, it certainly does on the ice. So he accomplished those things. He talked about that, and I think that will be his legacy for many seasons to come in how he transformed a lot of things that needed to be, well, repaired, frankly, with the Jets.
Part of the change of the culture is the captain. And, you know, they went the 1 year without one. And now this season, the start of the season, is Adam Lowry. And I think Adam Lowry could admit, he didn't say that today, but a big part of his career could be laid on the hands of the feet of Rick Bowness. So I think when we look back at this year, what did you think of the year that Adam Lowry had as captain? And he even talked about how Rick texted him through the year, asked him, how are you handling being the captain?
Yeah, exactly. And he said, like, you know, when it comes to sitting in a coach's office, whenever you're called to the coach's office, that's usually as a player, you're like, oh boy, what's coming? But
it's like going to the principal's office.
Yeah, he said more often than not, it was just Rick Bowness wanted to check in with him. You know, how things are going, what's the feel of the team, and all that kind of stuff. And Adam told a great story about a game in Dallas where Rick Bowness wasn't there, and after the game, Lowry goes to his phone. He's got like 6 or 7 texts from Rick Bowness, and it's just about, you know, on that play, we got to get in deeper, we got to forecheck harder, we got to do this. And I think Winnipeg came back and won that game. His final text from Rick Bowness is, Matt, you guys were great, you played well. So I mean, just the kind of guy that Rick Bowness was, and you know, obviously would ask Adam about, you know, everything else going on in his life as well. So you could just see, I mean, Adam Lowry, obviously, you know, that role that he's kind of taken on, even, you know, in the last few years, is that, you know, that shutdown type of center. But I mean, you look at the playoff success he had, you know, scoring a bunch of goals against Vegas, the huge one that got the building on its feet in you know, Game 3, and he just more or less continues to prove that he's that big game type of player. And, you know, Rick Bowness obviously saw something in that Appleton, Lowry, Niederreiter line, because there wasn't a whole lot of movement with that line when those 3 were healthy. And, you know, they went out and did an incredible job. But so often you hear players talk about accountability. And I would imagine, you know, there's conversations that have to happen in a dressing room that players don't like to have, coaches don't like to have. But one of the things for Rick Bowness was, you know, we can't be afraid to have those conversations. And I thought it was interesting about how Bowness talked about that on Monday in the press conference. And Adam Lowry's the same player that, you know, after the loss to Colorado was the one that said, yeah, you know, we get the game tied 3-3, but our line goes out and gives up a couple. Mm-hmm. Like, that's just the kind of leader that Lowry is. He's saying, you know what, I'm taking accountability for that. I mean, a number of things can happen that lead to a goal against, but that's just how Adam Lowry is wired. Right. And, you know, so a lot of that obviously comes from his upbringing and who he is as a person. But got to imagine that Rick Bowness was probably someone that was like, look, in a coaching role, you know, you have to have those conversations that you don't like to have. I'm sure Adam Lowry had to do that this year. Every single captain has to do that. And I'm sure Rick Bowness was someone that Adam could rely on in those situations too.
Further to that conversation, speaking of accountability, just think after Game 5 and the media availability, locker clean out. So this is from Kyle Connor, accountability from the team. 2 wins, we need better from everybody, and myself included. Dylan DeMello, there needs to be some time to kind of evaluate everything. Everything's on the table for sure, like we got to improve everything. And finally from Mark Scheifele, you have to go home, look yourself in the mirror at what you do well, what you don't do well, and that's the way that we're going to get out of this from within. Was that accountability here 2 years ago, would you say?
No, it probably wasn't. But also there comes with that some maturation, right? You're having to answer questions. Rick threw this onto the players that way, right?
Yes.
The one thing that Adam talked about today that I caught was that Rick was the ultimate communicator. Always communicating, whether that was in person, on the ice, off the ice. We saw Rick this is kind of strange. I've never seen this a lot, but in 2 years, we saw Rick sitting at stalls after morning skates with players and having that chat, or via text, always in communication. To go along with those great quotes from all of those players, Connor Hellebuck saying, I hope the learning curve is over for us, right?
Yeah.
There's more accountability from your number one goaltender. So, yeah, I think that Rick's legacy again, his tenure here will put this team in good stead. He's laid that foundation for these guys, and the next guy that comes in certainly will just be able to kind of pick up and run with fixing some of the on ice issues that they need to fix to be even better, to get past that first round. And Rick did a lot of the spade work and the foundation laying to kind of move this franchise along when it comes to on ice performance, for sure.
I want to get a comment from both of you on Scott Arniel, the associate coach for the Winnipeg Jets, was thrown in the fold quite a bit because of health issues from Rick and both Rick's wife Judy. Just what did you think and how he handled that, and obviously the trust that Rick had in his coaching group, not just Scott Arniel?
Yeah, and that's something that Rick Bowness said was really important to him, right? It's just you want to empower the rest of your coaching staff, because if you're just an assistant coach by title, but really like you're not running drills, not running meetings, like you're not growing as a coach. And that's something that Rick Bowness really wanted for his staff. And you could see it, I mean, on the radio broadcast, on the road especially, you get a couple of assistant coaches after second periods. That's always really, really good insight. And a head coach has to be comfortable with that, right? Like, yes, there's a lot of media requests of a head coach in the National Hockey League, but you have to be comfortable in the sense that if you're not doing those, but you want your assistant coaches to do it, you have to be comfortable in how they're going to be able to deliver the message. And it really seemed that was exactly the case. And, as for Scott Arniel, who stepped in, like you mentioned, as an associate coach and then interim head coach when Rick Bowness wasn't around due to health reasons, whether that was his own or Judy's, I think for Arniel, it can sometimes be a difficult position because, of course, he was a head coach in the NHL before with Columbus, but to go from associate coach to now you're the one deciding about, who's in, who's out, ice time, that kind of stuff. Sometimes that could be difficult in terms of, sometimes you're I don't want to say you're a friend and then you're not, because it's not really how it works, but sometimes that can kind of be how it feels. Like you're the person that sometimes a player will confide in, but then when you're the head coach, it's like, can I still go to this guy with the same thing? And like that's not necessarily any negative reflection on Arniel or the players. It's just kind of how it is, unfortunately, and at pro sports levels, right? So I thought he did a really good job of kind of walking that line of being true to himself and being who he needed to be behind the bench. It seemed like the players responded. The record that Scott Arniel has, obviously speaks to itself, but I mean, he's not going to take any credit for that. That's just kind of, he was given or put into the position to have to step up for a friend and step up to help out the team, and he did that.
Well, we heard a lot over the last 2 years, certainly from people that Rick has coached or played with, and the common denominator is great guy, great communicator, as you talked about. Scott very well, Paul. The opportunity and the learning lessons he's got from Rick from his playing days, you talked about that today, his coaching days. What do you think that he takes from learning from Rick Bowness as underneath him as the associate coach of this hockey club?
Well, the reins and run with them, really.
Yeah.
And the best part is to kind of piggyback what Mitchell was saying, the empowerment that was granted to the assistants, but more specifically to the associate coach, which there is a distinction, and Scott Arniel was that. And I remember having a conversation with Rick Bowness and him telling me, when I'm away for the month of November, as much as I didn't want to be away and health issues and long COVID the year before, I knew that things were in good hands because Scott Arniel's fingerprints have been all over this thing from day one. They didn't scheme anything when it came to neutral zone or rush chances or how they were defending in their own zone or anything without Scott having sort of the marker with the X's and O's and saying, this is the way I envision it. This is the way I see it. So from that standpoint, again, we can kind of harken back to the fact that the next guy that comes in, and we can maybe presume it's going to be Scott Arniel. We always thought that there was going to be that heir apparent there. Right. It hasn't been made official, and it wouldn't have been appropriate to make that official on Rick's day where he's retiring on Monday, right? So something along those lines will come down the pike a little bit later, but and appropriately so. But if it is Scott Arniel, then there's not going to be a lot of time to get to know you because he already knows everybody. They know him, and you can try to move this along in an expeditious fashion.
How good is it? What is it kind of a message does it send from the players and then like Mason Appleton, Vladislav Nemestikov, and Adam Lowry that were here for Rick's retirement post news conference?
And I think if it was logistically possible, a lot of players would have been
sure.
here just based on what you hear, right? I mean, Kevin BX on Hockey Night Canada has talked about, how important Rick Bowness was to his career and posted a photo of himself, Rick Rippon, and Rick Bowness from a practice on Twitter, X, call it what you will, today. So I think there would have been a lot of players here. And of course, for the Winnipeg Jets, logistically, some players have places that they have to get to shortly after the season. I mean, you think of like Nino Niederreiter's going to the Worlds with Switzerland. So obviously there's some obligations there, but yeah, I think it was really cool to see someone like Mason Appleton here, new father. Congratulations to him as well. And Vladislav Nemestikov, obviously the end of the season that he had, it's good to see him, upright, walking around, feeling pretty good. But obviously, and then Adam Lowry, of course. But you think of Vladislav Nemestikov and how many times he's crossed paths with Rick Bowness, like oddly fitting that he was able to be here on that day. And just a player that Rick Bowness could not say enough good things about. And I no doubt Vladislav Nemestikov appreciated that kind of support. So he probably figured at the very least, I'm going to, show up on the big day for a guy that's obviously played a big role in Vladislav Nemestikov's career.
You threw a question in the poll about what Rick's going to do to keep himself busy, fishing and golfing. And
he doesn't fish.
Yeah, he cleared that up real quickly with you. But you've had so many conversations with him over the year.
Yeah.
What are you going to take away from your time dealing with Rick over these past 2 seasons?
One thing I always appreciated about Rick, there's 2 things actually, and maybe one is kind of story time here. In the early years of my tenure, and that's been 10 years full time, and I remember Rick being the head coach of the Jets 1.0 back in the 80s. There was always, so when the time was here to kind of come back and kind of go full circle as they talked about, wherever the Jets were, whether it was Tampa and he was an assistant or associate there, or Dallas, when he would walk off the ice and see the Winnipeg guys, there was always a little bit of extra time for those guys, a nice smile that radiated from him. I told him this today. I always felt special because he knew his roots, right?
Yeah.
He knew I was from Winnipeg and working for the Jets, and that was important to him. I'll also take away the fact that he was honest. He was never, sometimes he couldn't give you the information for various reasons, whether he was waiting to see if a guy could go with a bad ankle or whatever it was, you understand. But he was just so honest. You knew where you stood with Rick. And that's why I think he had the respect of the players, because they knew where they stood with him. So, honesty, integrity, great communication. And he walks away, as he said, and Mitchell touched on it, he said repeatedly in one of his answers, he was very true to himself the whole time that he was a head coach. Got better as he went along as a coach. He was honest to himself. And I think those are great qualities when you're going to look in the mirror a few years down the road and have your kind of career flash by you in a few milliseconds.
Obviously, we're in the business of selling hope. What position has Rick left this team? Mitch, I'll start with you.
A really good one, and a motivated one, if that makes any sort of grammatical sense, because you think about how the last 2 postseasons have gone. You win game 1 and then you're not able to find a way to win either one of the next 4. And you think back to how the Vegas series ended versus how the Colorado series ended, and just the difference in feeling and emotion from the players after this Colorado one. They're all looking inward to themselves. How can I get better? But then it's also, you hear a lot of we. There's a big dynamic of they want to get better for themselves. Absolutely. You want, athletes at this level want to be the best they can possibly be, but they want to be better for the player next to them too. And I thought that was kind of put in the way that Connor Hellebuck spoke about how, you think of the career that Connor Hellebuck's had. Everywhere he's gone, really, he's been able to steal games. The National Hockey League's no different. And of course he's been able to steal games there, but he also said at his year end, maybe that's not the way I need to go about doing things now, where I just take everything on myself to do everything. he wants to be part of that group, that team dynamic. And that doesn't happen by accident. You know what I mean? Like these are proud athletes that, take pride in the ability to take over a game or to do whatever they need to do. And it really just seems like there's a buy-in, a collective buy-in from all of them in terms of what level that they have to get to. And then, as we know, you get to the postseason, there's no guarantees, but they're going to make sure that, should they earn their way back like they plan to, that they're going to be in a better position to be able to take advantage of it.
Paul?
Dylan DeMello, simply put, it wasn't good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they all wore that.
Yeah.
It was pretty raw emotion that they spoke with, and that comes from a good place. It doesn't come from something superficial or made up, right? Being 10% better, you heard that a lot, and I hadn't heard that before. It's not like they all got together and said, okay, what do you want to say? Well, let's say this. 10%. They talked about 10% better because obviously there was some sort of a conversation that said, gentlemen, if we just come up with an incremental improvement, just slightly better. And even in Rick's address today, he talked about 5%, 10%. So I saw a lot of, as you mentioned earlier on in this pod, ownership of where it got to, and certainly the desire to improve this and wear this for a while this off season. Josh Morrissey, we're going to be thinking about this for a lot. It was a different series and exit than it was against Vegas. This one, you had chances in certain games where you needed to play another 20 minutes of hockey, and you probably were either still playing in Game 6 or on the Saturday in Game 7, and that never happened. There was a few areas that failed them. They want to improve those areas. Now there's going to be probably some change with this team because there's a number of UFAs and some RFAs that need contracts and some players pushing in. But I think genuinely it will be a lot of the same group, and that's not a bad thing because I think this group accomplished a lot. 25 road wins, 52 wins this year, all of the games with 3 goals or less.
Yeah.
And they want to build on that. And I think that's the collective that's been created here through all of the things that we've talked about. The collective being on the same page and wanting to pull for each other. We heard so many times over the last 2 years of how tight this group was. I think that if there's going to be a solution, the tight group will find it in the year or years to come.
Gentlemen, appreciate your time on behalf of Mitchell Clinton, Paul Edmonds.
That's it?
That's it.
That's it? You didn't want to
20-minute
talk
period.
about the penalty kill?
I know that you love
Another
to talk.
pod? Another
I'm sorry to
pod.
give you a break. You guys have talked so much
Another
already.
day, another pod.
That's right. We have a long off season, or not? Hopefully, some more information coming down the pipeline here. Eventually, down the road, a new head coach, et cetera, et cetera. But gentlemen, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Again, by half Mitchell Clinton, Paul Edmonds. I'm Jamie Thomas. This is Ground Control. We'll see you next time.